Good afternoon, everyone. Thrilled to see all of you here today. So today it's all about effective polling integration in education. So as educators, I think the key questions that you're often faced is how do you elevate your learner engagement from being passive to being active? I think one of the tools for engagement when used effectively is polling. It's easy, it can be done, but has to be used effectively. And how do you integrate the polling in education such that it aligns with the goals established and engages your learners? To that end, we are thrilled today to bring to you this clinical teaching seminar in partnership with Stanford. And it's my honor and delight to introduce Dila Baumgardner and Peter Nguyen. Dila is an instructional designer, graphic designer, and a video editor at Stanford. And Peter is a computational biologist by training. He's an educator and a learning technologist. So both Dila and Peter will discuss some best practices for polling design, and you will hear the key principles and strategies on how to strategically integrate the polling at different stages of the presentation. So no matter what your role is, whether it's giving presentation or even facilitating meetings, as you engage in the discussion today, start thinking about what strategies really resonate with your teaching style and how might you integrate polling in the work that you do. And as always, feel free to type in questions, comments at any point in the chat, and we'll keep an eye on that. With that, I'll pass on the ball to you, Adam, if you want to make any housekeeping or any, and Adam is the Associate Director for Instructional Development at Stanford School of Medicine, who will be co-hosting the session with me today. So Adam, if you wanted to get us started, any logistics you want to share?
No, I think that was a great introduction. Thank you for having us all. We're thrilled to be here. And any questions, you can put it in the chat. I'll monitor that as well, and we can go ahead and get started. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Dila and Peter, all yours.
Awesome. All right, I'm going to share my screen now and go into presentation mode.
All right.
All right. Hi again, to reiterate, I'm Peter. And I'm
Dila. Everyone always asks, so it's Sheila with a D. There you go.
We're part of the Stanford Medicine EdTech team, and we're thrilled to be bringing you just some insights into polling and pedagogy. So the purpose today is we're pretty much talking about how to really engage students via the use of polling. And we're approaching this in a kind of a three-pronged strategy, and it's trying to get some initial engagement at the start of the lesson, some transitional key points in order to kind of do knowledge checks, pulse checks, things of the like, and then kind of having a recap, some type of review at the conclusion of the lesson. This pretty much allows students to actively engage with whatever content you are sharing at various points throughout what you're lecturing. So for today, you will need some type of device for poll entry. It can be your mobile device or it can be your computer. Have the link pollev.com/PENGUYEN ready because we're going to practice what we preach and poll. And then you will have activity sheets sent out to you via chat when we have kind of a more hands-on component later. All right, I'm gonna pass this off to Dila to talk about learning objectives.
Okay, thank you, Peter. I've put a document in the chat. You guys don't need it right now, but eventually you will need that for your learning objectives later on in our hands-on exercise. So this is my nerdy fun. The reason we bring this into something about polling and the way I sneak it into pretty much every lecture I ever give is because a lot of times when you struggle or you find you're having a hard time figuring out how to integrate something like polling or another educational technology, the problem isn't what most people say, oh, I'm technologically inept, I don't like to use technology, I don't know what to do. A lot of times it comes back down to your learning objectives. So we're going to set ours here, talk about what we're going to cover today, and then we're also going to kind of talk about how a learning objective guides the creation of a polling question. So at the end of this workshop, I always say, hope that you will be able to, first of all, evaluate lesson learning objectives of your own for polling question building potential, i.e. read your questions and decide, how could I make a poll to support this objective? We're going to actually walk you through the build of a basic poll. So we hope that you'll be able to take that knowledge back with you and build your own polls. How to start a lesson with a poll and to encourage engagement and spark interest, which is the real function of starting off with one. How to use a poll to emphasize key concept and set up for upcoming concepts. In the middle of your lesson, polls can be kind of like a bridge between learning objectives as a way to kind of test that they got what you already said and prepare them for what you're about to say. And at the conclusion, reinforce lesson learning objectives and assess whether or not short-term retention has been successful. And then also just kind of conclude your lesson with a final thought via engagement.
All right, so
let's
we're going
start.
to start the poll. So if everyone can go to pollev.com/PENGUYEN, you should get redirected to a home page. It should ask you to insert your name. And then I will go on to the question. How often do you use polling for teaching?
And I want to point out, everyone, as you can see at the bottom, there's a little counter that tells you how many results are in. And so as an instructor, that's valuable because you can see what your rate of response is, how quickly people are doing it, and give you an idea on when you should close a poll or start sharing results. You can share the results while they're coming in and allow the poll to remain open, or you can lock the poll and then just show the results after they've been submitted.
Yeah, and it really depends on both your teaching style as well as how you want to execute certain content, depending on what type of information you want to send out and when specifically you want your students to see. Educators kind of just vary depending on which route they opt for.
And sometimes it's fun to watch them change their answers when they see what other people are saying. I mean, it's kind of like those television shows where you're watching the polls and they can see, I think it's like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, and the audience enters in and you can see as people are realizing, oh, I picked the wrong one, and they change it. It's kind of like that sometimes.
Okay, I'm seeing the numbers change a little bit. Is there anybody else who still needs time to input their response? Okay, so sorry, I'm hoping silence is a good thing. So I will move on to the results page. Okay, this is an interesting spread. So most of the users said occasionally. This is great. We also have some hardly evers and some nevers. So hopefully after this presentation, that will change to maybe at least occasionally. So this is something that we'll touch upon a little bit later, but just having this live result visually presented to the audience is really valuable. And we find this to be a critical part of the polling experience because it really does promote transparency and it allows students to see how everyone else is responding. And this, and there you go, a live poll change. And it there are so many different avenues in which this is really effective. So I know that a lot of learners do experience anxiety. For instance, if somebody does have an answer to a question, but they're too afraid to raise their hand in class, right? Or if it could completely derail the conversation if you have somebody who diverts off to tangents. So this is kind of a really clean way to get all of these responses and to kind of see where the class is in terms of how they feel about whatever question it is you're asking.
And as far as kind of a pedagogical approach, I mean, this is something I would do in my physical classroom when I taught high school. At the very start of a semester, at the start of a concept, I would always kind of just try to ask, like, where do people think they stand? Like, how much do you think you already know? And that's also for me as an educator, so that I can tailor what goes next to what it is that they need. So, for example, in this one, if everybody in here said, "Oh, I use polling all the time," I would probably pivot and be a little bit more specific and talk about, like, okay, well, let's get into the nitty gritty. Let's talk about I don't know, something else. But if everybody said I've never used a poll, I might slow it down a little bit because you don't want to lose people either. So it's a great way in any topic to get a feel for an in the moment needs analysis.
And echoing the technical perspective, I kept this poll open so that you can kind of see the results live change, to accommodate for people who are experiencing technical difficulties, people who might have a change of heart. But should you want, you can lock the poll, which is what I just did. So at this point, no one can change their answers. These are the responses that are kind of locked in. And as I said, depending on what you're teaching and how you want that information to be distributed and controlled, you can go either way.
Another interesting thing about using polling and using something where someone has to get out their device. Now, this is probably more for the high school setting, but I think it could also be as we've moved a lot of our education into situations like this where people have their cameras off and are at home. I find it's also a way of keeping them engaged because they've got their phone out anyway. Let's be real. They're on their phone. And in a way, it's your way of keeping them in the conversation, even though they've got their phone in their hand. So I find that that's another kind of valuable reason to use something like this to occupy their device. So why do we use polls? This is why, to stimulate people. Learning stimuli are crucial for establishing learner attention. If we talked to Kavitha mentioned in the beginning, passive versus active learning, and just sitting there watching somebody talk live action or on camera is boring and it's passive, and people fall off very quickly in their attention span. In fact, fun fact, the average person will pay attention to something static for about 8 seconds. A little bit less than a goldfish will pay attention to something, like legit fact. And so you want to stimulate them, and then you want to activate them. You want to get them moving, get them thinking, and get them in that engagement feedback loop. Engage, feedback, engage, feedback. That's how we get retention. So you've got them paying attention. Now you've got them learning and retaining, hopefully, what you're saying, because it's an experience. Now they've got other things to connect in their brain to the topic that's being discussed. In a way, it's a conversation. And then you as an instructor get a chance to adapt. You get a chance to see the feedback, to fit the needs of your learner, or in a way confirm the design you already had in place. And you get what's really nice is a repository of information after the class is done. In a live classroom, you're going to ask these questions, but unless you're recording it and then you've got somebody over there transcribing everything later, you don't get that information kind of in your pocket to look at later. That's the beauty of digital education. You're going to have these answers and these results later to look at and analyze, okay, how am I doing when I teach? So at the start of the lesson, that's really when stimulation is the most important. You want to start off by something that just gets people thinking. You're not trying to catch them up on what they don't know. You're not trying to really get to a learning objective yet. You're just trying to get them in that mental space about whatever topic, especially today where we're all sitting in copious amounts of Zoom meetings and digital interactions. A lot of times we don't even get time to reset. I don't know about the people here, but no matter how hard I try, seem to always end up with meetings back to back to back. And I'm not trying to get better about having those 15 minutes in between to kind of free my brain up. But this helps that at least kind of move into the topic. Activating, engaging are what you're doing kind of, forgive me, in a loop between transitioning between key points. You activate their thoughts about what they're learning, then you engage them in the next point, and you continue going in that cycle. And then at the conclusion, I would say I could have probably put here adapt or review. For the learner, the polling is this as a point of review. For the educator, it is a point of future adaptation and analysis of data.
All right, and now this is leading into another poll. So what types of questions or activities do you immediately think of when we talk about polling? And feel free to input your responses.
And this poll is called a WordCloud poll. So you're seeing it's obviously it's got an algorithm. It's just kind of putting everything in there. We also noticed together that it works really well with single word answers. It gets a little interesting because we're putting in multiple words and it's kind of mixing them up in a strange way. And but it's fun to watch and it's visually pleasing and it's got a little built-in animation. So we like that.
And as you see, some words are larger than others. So the larger it gets is a visual reflection of how many inputs it has for that specific term. So I see multiple choice coming up a lot. I see questions. Okay, ooh, spectrum.
Elections.
Icebreaker. Yeah, I know. I'm primed to affiliate polling with voting and elections and things like that.
So is the Google search engine when one is looking for a polling and pedagogy presentation.
That's very fair.
The other thing that's kind of good about this is because people can also enter it multiple times. And by giving them that prompt and telling them, okay, if you want in a way to emphasize or second, you see somebody brought something up and you think, oh yes, that's definitely something I would like to also add, encourage people to do that so we can see what is truly the most popular association, the most popular answer, even if it wasn't their first thought.
Interesting. Yeah.
I like the one that put lunch in.
And this is also really fascinating to look at just from an analytics perspective, just to see how everyone's thinking, looking at like the different thoughts that people have and the different perspectives that they bring to the table. So if you were bringing up some type of topic and you really wanted to get a pulse check from the audience to see like what's their knowledge base on this, or how do they feel about a certain topic, this is a pretty neat way to kind of garner that in a really succinct word cloud.
And the output of these and the results of these can also serve as good study guides. So if you're teaching, I'm not sure what things are being taught right now in the group of people that we have here, but an example is we use the learning objectives later on from a course that we do on tapering patients off of opioids. And this is a great example of something that we could use in the live portion of that course when we're talking about how do you talk to a patient? What is it you would say? How are you going to broach the subject to a patient about something that's potentially very, very fear inciting for them? And so you put those words in here. And then later on, after that discussion, this is a great resource for a student or for a resident to download and kind of look at later and remember the conversation that came up around this topic.
Yeah. So this question had more of a content focused spin to it. I'm going to move on to another poll question, and this is more of a feelings pulse. So one of the hot topics in any form of educating these days is social emotional learning. And one of the things that you really do want to check in with your learners is not just where they stand in terms of the didactic material, but how they're feeling in general, or even about the topics at hand. So I'm going to switch and I'm going to do something a little bit more informal. And okay, travel to me is kind of an outdated concept these days. And so when travel returns, where would you like to go? This is something to exhibit one of the clickable image options for polling that software such as Poll Everywhere and other similar softwares allow us to do. And I think this is a really great way to just get learners engaged while exhibiting something very visual. Oh my, okay. Get the spread of all of this.
This is just a fun question to do in general, though, because it's interesting to see we're all heading for the tropics for the most part. The vast majority of us. Ooh, lots of us are going to Scotland. Let's do it, guys.
I know this is definitely a popular backdrop for, you know, introductions, like where are you from,
Icebreakers.
things like that. Great ice-breaking activity. I've known some history and geography educators who have taken advantage of this as well. So you can get really creative with how you do this. And this is just one example. This is one of the stock images that came with this software, but you can upload your own image, your own diagram, and you can have it any way you want to in terms of how you want learners to engage with a particular visual.
Speaking, thinking medically, sorry, my cat wouldn't leave me alone. A great tool for training on reading scans, on evaluating spaces. I think we've used this in the past also to kind of like find the error in the patient room or in the what's the like surgical setup. Also, but we've definitely used it on medical scans when people are trying to identify whatever they're looking for in a CT scan or an X-ray or an MRI.
Okay. Awesome. So yeah, this is just kind of a nice break from just pure content and an opportunity for you to really interact with your learners and get a chance to see how they're doing. All right, I'm gonna move on.
And I did see some questions around what tool we're using. We are using Poll Everywhere right now, but we do talk a little bit later about other options for things that you can use and kind of what are the most commonly offered types of polls, specifically the one that I believe is most common with the Kaiser users or employees is Mentimeter, and it has a word cloud function as well. Ooh, yay, my favorite part. So let's talk about learning objectives and what you might need to do to your learning objectives before you embark on your poll building activities. Hopefully this is not news, but if it is, I'm excited to share it with you. A good learning objective usually fits these 5 markers. It is specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based. And those qualities are really what make it easy to write a poll around a learning objective. The first is specific. This is our first learning objective for this lesson, and it is as specific as we could get. We didn't use any general or vague terms. The specific things being that you are evaluating lesson learning objectives specifically. For poll building, you could have made it more general and just said, recognize learning topics and how they work with polls. That's not quite as specific and leaves a lot to interpretation, but this tells you exactly what we would like you to be able to do by the end of this activity. They need to be measurable. So in order to be measurable, it needs to be something that you can in some way quantify, and that really ties to the verb, evaluate. I can give somebody an activity that simulates evaluation. They can look at 2 options and tell me which is the better option. They are in sense evaluating. That verb, we'll talk about that verb in a little bit, is usually what trips people up. They want to do things like, by the end of this lesson, you will know. Knowing is very hard to measure and is highly subjective. You will, again, recognize is not as hard, but knowing, that is probably the majority of the time I spend fixing learning objectives is removing the verb know. I can't tell you or argue with you about whether or not you know something, or remember for that matter. Attainable. It needs to be something that they can actually achieve. So you don't want to set a goal that is beyond the scope of somebody's either ability with the technology that they have, ability with the prior knowledge that they have. Don't make it something like, don't set a goal for somebody that requires them to know something you don't know that they know. That happens a lot, actually, I found in medical education, where sometimes as the subject matter expert or the content expert, you're connecting the dots very easily, but you're forgetting that it's because you have all this experience. So you really want to take on the student lens when you're writing your learning objective and think, ooh, was there anything somebody would have had to know before reading this in order to understand it? And then also the relevancy is the need. What need do they have to achieve this? And that kind of makes it relevant to them. If you're trying to teach somebody something that's not relevant to what they're doing, or you're not tying it to what they're already doing. So that's really, you want to make sure that your learning objectives, if you're having a hard time refining them, look into, well, what will make this connect for my learner to the other things that they do in their career or in their life. And last, go ahead.
I was going to say, I will jump in and add that this is kind of the prime example of the student in a classroom just asking why they need to learn a certain topic, right? Like if you can't create that connection to show them, you know, how this is useful, how this is applicable in not only this particular subject, but daily life and career building and things of the like, it'll spark a disconnect.
Yes, you want to set the stage. And then for time-based, I tie this to two things. One, can it be learned in the time that you have to teach? And so often with medical education, that is the deal breaker there. Someone tries to fit so much more in their lesson than any one brain can actually take in a single session. And as a result, end up trying to self-teach later and missing a lot of the important context. But also, is it tying into practice? Have you given, is it setting somebody up to be able to do it over and over in a way that will kind of help them retain that information? So can they learn it in the time that you have it, and can they practice it after they've left your instructional time? So as we were talking about earlier, verbs matter. These are some great examples from Bloom's taxonomy of the kinds of verbs that really help support, they're good for learning objectives because they can fit this kind of SMART model: creating, evaluating, analyzing, applying, understanding. That's another one I don't actually like. That I wish I should have starred that one. That's another one I see a lot that I take out from people, because whether or not somebody understands it, there's just a lot to interpret there. But whether that they recall or remember it, yeah, that's when you're just doing that straight rote memorization, you know, which answer is right. But applying, analyzing, evaluating, and creating, those are good ways to go. And this is what those verbs kind of accomplish.
I will tack on that for the understanding component, you really want to get as specific as you want. So similar to what Dila was saying earlier about no, right? The word no, it's just like, if you ask if somebody knows about something, that is such a wide breadth of possibilities that you want to really hone in on the specifics. So similar to understand, instead of saying understand how the body works, you want to dive into very specific functions, very specific organs, whatever it is you want to talk about topics wise, and make sure that's spelled out so that in order to create those learning objectives, you know that the students will actually have to know X, Y, and Z.
I've just posted a link in the chat to a University of Nebraska's Medical Center downloadable sheet on learning objectives that is awesome. I have it posted everywhere that I work. And it kind of gives you like, what are the kinds of verbs that fall under these topics? So comprehending or understanding, a better way to quantify that was like, can someone arrange, associate, classify, describe, discuss, or explain? Those are all ways of measuring comprehension or understanding without saying, you know, by the end of this lesson, you will understand. So better verbs, check that out, print it out. Love it the way I love it. So let's see, so let's talk about the types of polls. In Poll EV, when you go to create a new poll, this is what you'll see. It's the multiple choice. Obviously, it's the first thing everybody thinks of. It's the most commonly used one. It's versatile. You can do it a number of ways. You can have it be a single answer option. You can have it be a multiple answer option as far as accuracy and correct answer. And you can kind of use it like you use it to build other types of questions. You can use it to build a ranking system. You can use it to do true or false, even though some of them have existing true or false templates. The word cloud you saw, the competition one is fun. We do this every week in our, we do trivia on our team every week. And sometimes it's very random things that people on our team just happen to have read in the news. And other times it's fun facts about the work that we're doing. It's kind of a way for team building. And every time you answer, depending on how fast you get the right answer and whether or not you get the right answer, you get points. And so that's a great, I could see, I would go back and use this during my review sessions and as a way of trying to see, gamify, if you will, how they review and revise. The rankings is essentially just a multiple choice question. The clickable image, again, think outside the box there. Any hotspot, any image with hotspots can go there. The other one that's good is, I don't really use either of these. I mean, they're pretty self-explanatory. Question and answer, self-pasted, numeric rating. But there's one more, the open, here we go, the open answer. So the types that are most common that you'll see pretty much everywhere are multiple choice questions, true, false, rate or rank, and open answer. I really like the open answer when soliciting feedback from students or looking for more in-depth comprehension. So if you've got a smaller group and you really want to hear them, for example, practice how to broach the topic of an opioids intervention, then I could say, okay, here's a question, write out how you would talk to a patient about this. And now I may not do anything with that feedback in the moment, but I can take it, analyze it, and leave notes for them, and then discuss it with the student later. So the open answers one are really great for both feedback for your own education, for your own learning, and to get kind of more in-depth think essay questions, which we all hate grading, but there they are. Mentimeter, if you haven't checked it out, that was the tool we were told that is most often used by your colleagues. It has a free option, and that's the one that everyone is using. Poll EV has a free option, but it's very limited. It's like we're using one that's a Stanford account. But Mentimeter comes pretty close to offering a lot of the same stuff, and I think it's a really great option. The scales, the one that's selected there, I was interested in because you can kind of see like as two answers are kind of being pitted against each other and how like where the majority of people fall on those questions. But it has the word cloud that a couple of you had expressed interest in. I saw in the chat. So a free option for you to be able to do that.
Yeah, and one thing I wanted to point out is the screens before were from Poll Everywhere, and this is a snapshot of what Mentimeter has to offer. And just kind of echoing what Dila was talking about in terms of the most common types of polls that are readily available to people, it's regardless of what software you use, there are going to be kind of these universal polling types that appear anywhere. One distinction I wanted to make that I personally had to clear the air about is the term multiple choice. So in the world of evaluation, multiple choice really broadly means something that has multiple choices. Whether or not there is a single correct answer or multiple correct answers is up to you. But coming from a standardized testing schooling environment, I was so primed to think that it was just a single answer that was available in this type of polling. So when you do interact with these types of softwares, multiple choice usually gives you the opportunity to set how many correct answers you want, or just for people to select multiple options. And then usually there's a setting or a different type of poll if you want single choice correct answer.
And Datlu, you read my mind. Yes, both Mentimeter and Poll EV integrate well into PowerPoint or Google Slides. So that is, and that's kind of a key feature, right? When we're teaching online, we kind of need it just to go in.
Yeah.
Can it be used with Teams? I don't know if there's an integration into Microsoft Teams, but in theory, you could present from your PowerPoint or your Google Slides presentation while meeting in Google Teams, so it would be just fine.
All right, so we're talking about polling, but then there's kind of been this evolution of the technology of polls. So SRSs, or student response systems, I don't know if anyone else had to use a clicker like I did in college, but these external devices that, you know, pretty much served as a not so subtle way of taking attendance, did force you to engage with the content at hand. However, there were a lot of different workarounds that I saw. You know, students would hand off their clickers to a friend if they didn't want to go to class, or furthermore, if you had left yours back in your dorm or your apartment, then you were really nervous about how to get participation points for that. So that was kind of the start of integrating technology into the classroom lecture. But now, with how ubiquitous mobile devices are, there are software that integrate into that. You can download an app, you can just go in a web browser. So things like Poll Everywhere, Mentimeter, and just things that are web-based, just to make it easier, do allow you to engage with the content and also embed the content into your presentations, as Dila was talking about, so that it's simplifies the process both for the instructor as well as for the learner. And
now, I wanted to add, though, it's worth asking about in some cases if you're either working in a low resource setting or a more restricted setting where someone is not allowed to have a mobile device. That's when it's worth either looking into renting or finding out if somebody already has one of these systems, and that's an option to consider.
Yeah, great point. And then the last bit is, because of how kind of software works, there are a lot of features that offer data so that you can have, you know, robust ways of analyzing student engagement, student responses, checks for understanding. I know educators who really don't use the polling inputs as a way to gauge, you know, correct or incorrect for points in the class for grades. They just want to see, like, am I actually getting the students on the right track in terms of knowledge, or even how often certain students are participating versus others. It's just, you can really manage it any way you want to get to extract the data that you would like. Okay, so now we have an activity, and I'll let Dila take the lead.
So this is going to be quick. This is, you know, don't feel pressured to get it all done. Do as much as you can. You're going to, we're going to send you off into rooms of 3 to 4 participants. Yeah, I'm going to repost the link for the, hold on, let me find it. There we go. Here's the link again for those of you who arrived after it was posted or just don't want to scroll back to the chat. For the Google document that has a set of learning objectives from our learning how to taper patients off of chronic opioid therapy course. They're very specific. Don't feel like you have to know the topic that well. I think the learning objectives are enough to kind of form a question around it. If you just want to practice on a different learning objective, again, you're welcome to do that. But for the sake of exampling, we just thought we'd get everyone the same stuff to work with. Try to come up with 3 polling questions, one that you would use at the start of a lesson, one that you would use to transition between 2 of those objectives, and one that would somehow summarize or conclude a lesson that centered around these learning objectives. If you have any questions, I don't know how the chatting works in the breakout rooms. I think you can reach out to the main room, Peter?
Yes,
Adam?
you can ask for help.
Okay.
Yeah, you can use your hand in the chat room. And
Awesome. One of us will help you, but really this is just meant to be an exercise where you start thinking about polls. So without further ado, I'm going to do some math here, which is not something an art major should be required to do. And I'm going to say we need, what, 12 rooms? Peter?
That's fine. Go for it.
I'm going to go 14. Okay, it should be 3 to 4 people per room. And away you go. We'll call you back in 7 minutes. Oh, look, it tells me down here 3 to, that was great. I did good math. Okay. We'll call you back in 7 minutes. Welcome back, everybody. Sorry to cut you off mid-conversation. We're super stoked to see that it looked like nobody had any questions, and hopefully some of you didn't mind being moved around as we tried to give you someone to talk to, although it did get mentioned that maybe sometimes people like being alone in their breakout room to do their exercise, but so apologies if that disrupted your train of thought. We hope you had a good time playing with the tapering patients off opioids learning objectives. We do encourage you to put the mute back on, though, if you had it off to talk, because otherwise we will hear your background noises and any phone calls that you answer. Peter, do you want to go ahead and push us into the next slide?
Sure. So now that you've had a chance to kind of build this out, I'm going to try another type of poll activity. Hopefully this will inspire you. Complete this sentence. I will use polls in my next lesson to ask for feedback. Okay, great.
Assess. Yes, assess is the,
Yes.
that's the big one. Knowledge check and assess and feedback.
Right. I like gauge. That's a good one. Ooh, elicit.
Ooh, set a baseline. I like that too.
That is such a key feature in pedagogy.
Oh, as a meeting topic, setting a meeting topic. I hadn't even thought about using it in meetings. I mean, I guess we do that already because we.
I will demonstrate this in a little bit, but one polling tool that they do have on Poll Everywhere and some other platforms is upvoting. So people can submit a bunch of different topics and then leave it up to the audience to prioritize what they would want to do. Yeah.
Definitely more meeting appropriate than classroom appropriate.
Yeah, it'd be a little dangerous to leave it up to the learners to decide learning objectives, maybe.
Oh, I love this. Pre-test.
Okay. Ooh, I see emotions. I like that. That's a
relax. That's a good one. Chill everybody out.
I mean, yeah, that's important too. Like you want to make sure that learners are in the proper mood in order to engage. Otherwise, it's just, they're not going to retain anything. It's not going to be a good time. Great. Okay, so I see that feedback, knowledge, and assess are kind of the biggies here, and that's fantastic. Like polling is meant to do all of these things. Like, you see the wide array of different responses, and that's why we really like it. It's so versatile. You can adapt it to exactly how you want to run your session and get that type of feedback back. So my next one is going to be a bit of a pulse check, and this is going to be a departure from content and just do a check-in. How are you feeling today? Ooh, I see a lot of greens. That's good.
But you know what else? We could have done this at the beginning and then at the end. That would have been interesting.
That's always that loop. Yeah, that's always good to see, like the pre-test for feeling and the post-test just to see. Wow.
Did my content calm you down or stress you out?
This is overwhelmingly positive. I'm excited. I'm kind of at the orange point right now, but that's mostly because there's construction happening at my space, so it's kind of loud. Great. So as I said, this is another use of the clickable image with different hotspots that people can just, select where. And a really common use is this type of really simple way of checking in on how people are feeling. It doesn't require words or expression. It's just a simple click to show on this visual scale where your students and learners are.
Now I have a question because I actually haven't used this one very often.
Mm-hmm.
I forget. Can you set it to do multiple selections?
So hotspot, it depends on the software.
Okay.
Mostly they by default will only allow one, but some will let you do multiple, or you would have like multiple tries, and then you can set those
Okay.
hotspots at different tries.
That
Yeah.
makes sense. All right.
Great. Okay, glad to hear. No reds, no oranges. This is exciting. All right. And I know you just broke out into your activities, but I just want to give you a quick rundown on how I build a poll. And if you bear with me, I'm going to stop this presentation mode very briefly and dive into Poll Everywhere.
And Poll Everywhere has a web-based login, but it is also a desktop application as well as a browser plugin. So there are a couple of little setup things that you do to get it running.
All right, so I am in my Poll Everywhere account. And as we talked about before, this just happens to be the one that we have access to and are using, regardless of which software or platform you're using, such as Mentimeter. I know Slido is popular, even Kahoot, which has a more gamified component to it. You're going to see a lot of universal topics. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click New Activity. And what I like about this is these softwares are built out to be really user-friendly. They have all of the types of polls set out for you already. So you can click the multiple choice, the word cloud, you can do Q&A, things like that. These up here are the most commonly used ones for Poll Everywhere, but they do have more either kind of adaptations of common types for more specific and nuanced use cases, or just separate ones. So as I had mentioned, upvote, what should be prioritized, right? So that's an opportunity for you to really utilize that type of poll to engage with students to steer the direction of where the lecture is going or where the activity is going. Select on a map, I already did that. Bulletin board is really interesting. It's just kind of posting the different responses. You can have a matrix if you want to get really graphical with this type of visual data. And one thing I do want to highlight is survey. This seems to be present in some of the polling software I've used, but it might be labeled differently. The difference is if you're doing a specific type of activity, this is a very specific question you're going to make. It's a la carte, but a survey is just a string of poll questions together. And so if you wanted to create back-to-back questions where students wouldn't necessarily get a break between, if you're doing like a Google Slides presentation, you can do a survey. So that's kind of the only stark difference I wanted to point out, is that you just keep adding questions and it is more of a long form.
In some cases, I've seen it called a test, and in some cases, I think I've seen it called a stack.
Yeah.
I forget who calls it a stack, but one of them does. Oh, 2-minute warning. Okay.
All right. And I'm going to go back to this. Excuse me.
Okay. We can go through these pretty quickly. So Peter, just go to the one that has everything on there.
Yeah.
So these are just like, what's the significance? And we've talked a lot about the first two, engagement and the feedback loop, but I want to talk about the last one, which is building community. A lot of times when people are critical of, especially before we absolutely had to go to online learning, people always, oh, online learning is not as good as the classroom because you have no sense of community. Polling really does get you closer to that because it's simulating something that you would have done in a live classroom that you aren't probably doing if you're just lecturing on the computer. Because I don't know if anyone's ever tried to do a session of 20 plus participants with microphones on. It's a hot mess. But polling is a way to give everybody a voice and make them feel like they're interacting with each other without letting them turn on their microphones. So it's building community. It's adding transparency, like we mentioned before, because you can leave the polling information up for them. They get to see their peers' reactions to some degree. It's kind of fun actually to let the cameras be on, because if you can maintain the bandwidth, you just watch everyone's facial expressions while they're going through these polls, especially when if you ever want something funny, have them turn on their cameras while they're taking a quiz, because people do the funniest things on their faces when they're taking quizzes. And then opportunities to showcase kind of different ways of thinking by asking questions in all these different ways. It's also going to help you because that data is available later and because you're kind of making real world gamification types of activities within your lesson. It's extending your learning outside the classroom. And really that's what we want for retention. We want people thinking about these things after they've left.
Well, the final thing was I did set up a survey and you are free to input your responses as you so choose. But I know we are at the end of this.
At a time.
Yeah.
Thank you everyone for joining. We hope you guys are excited to do polls and will use these materials in the future.
Yeah, and as kind of an extension of continuity beyond the classroom, we will share this slide deck with you, and we do have resources and some of the citations that we use in order to get the research for this.
And the slide deck is actually linked into the document that you got your learning objectives from the activity.
Thank you, Dila and Peter. I know we are running out of time. Really appreciate you taking the time and sharing with us all these different strategies and really going over the basic functionality. I really love that. So thank you for that. And as you mentioned, I think it's really important to be clear on what you really hope to accomplish, no matter what type of polling platform that you use. So thank you for your time, and thank you all for joining us and sharing with us. And I hope you'll be walking away with some of the best practices, and I challenge you to consider integrating polling at your next presentation. And some of you have asked us about the recording. Yes, as Adam mentioned, the recording will be available on our SharePoint site, and we'll be sharing that with you all. And reminder to complete the CME survey. And yes, this will be another great way of dropping the poll if you want to use polling option as in lieu of your CME survey. Another great way of capturing your audience input right there. Thank you again, and I will look forward to seeing you at our next session, which is on the 12th of April, which is on bedside teaching. Anything else, Adam, you want to add before we wrap up? And
No, thanks everyone for coming, and thanks to our great speakers today.
Yeah, thank you, Dila and Peter. Thanks, Tom.
Sure thing.
And the handouts will be available, right, for us to download from the link that you sent, correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, have a nice afternoon.
Have a nice day, everyone.